What a delight to have Todd Segal from A2A. And our team has been working with Mr. Rao, Mr. Todd, and the whole A2A team to think about, what does it mean to create a highly interoperable world of agents. So delighted to have you, Todd. Please go ahead.
Thanks for having me. This is great. I strongly endorse a lot of the things that have been said here already. It's very aligned with conversations we've had inside of Google. So real quick introduction of me. My name's Todd. I lead engineering for A2A at Google. I've been at Google for a few years, working mostly on enterprise agents, enterprise AI, and APIs. Enterprise, I think, has a lot of very common features to consumer. Namely, from a business perspective, everything needs to work together. Customers need all of their things in a central place, and they can't have all these different walled gardens that don't work together. That's a common consumer need as well. And then also everything has to be trusted, maintain appropriate privacy, apply to, adhere to appropriate regulations, et cetera, et cetera. So very, very related. Before Google, I was at Twitter. That was in the before days, but I worked on the Twitter API as well, and some of the authentication and authorization concerns with Twitter as well. And then before that, I was at Microsoft for a very, very long time. So just to echo what's already been said here, yeah, we're entering a multi-agent world. So there's going to be, I agree, there's going to be billions, if not trillions of agents. People are going to have their digital twins. They're perhaps going to have multiple digital twins, their work persona, their home persona, their family persona, et cetera. And they may have different agentic representations of these. Individual services, individual stores will have agents working for them that will help with customer service, help complete tasks, help automate things inside their businesses. And for these things to be valuable and for there to be true openness, there's going to be multiple frameworks. There's going to be many, many domain-specific agents that people customize and specialize for particular purposes. And these things have to work together. They just do. We can't say everyone is forced to use this model and everyone must use this framework and host it on this infrastructure. This needs to be highly democratized. It needs to be extremely open, and new protocols, new interfaces, et cetera, are going to pop up, and A2A is one of them. MCP has really gone viral, and for context on the Google side, I'm also leading Google's adoption of MCP. We find MCP is fantastic for building individual agents, but it's difficult to represent an agent as a tool. So just like that last great demo showed, the interface between different agents, or maybe even humans and agents, is really conversational. Whereas the interface between an agent and tool is highly structured with specific types of inputs, specific types of domain problems it can solve, and specific outputs. So over at Google, we started working on a new service interface that has turned into this protocol called agent to agent. And there's a typo in here. The word two should be a two. And this is a truly open protocol. And the reason I say it's an open protocol is everything we're doing is building it out in the open. So it is not at version 1.0 yet. So there's a lot of things that happen inside A2A and that are happening in A2A, and we're building it all in the open with our partners. So a call to action before I get to the rest of the deck is join the GitHub, and we are very open to PRs and issues and discussions and taking feature requests and working on it, because we're pushing very hard to get to a version 1.0 later this year. Our version 0.2 is coming out shortly, probably within the next week, but we're building everything out in the open. So it's an open protocol. Like I said, it's designed with enterprise use in mind for secure and governed experiences, but really in any sort of experience, whether it's enterprise or consumer, you need privacy. You need to make sure you trust the agents you're using. You need to make sure there's open standards being used. You need to make sure there's observability there, and then especially trust, as this conference is talking about. And at the moment, it's built on top of existing popular standards, so including, it's based on JSON-RPC over SSE. We're actively looking at more transports as well. So for example, gRPC, there's requests for REST. We're open to all of these as well. And we're seeing more and more asks or contributions for SDKs and new transports. So again, call to action as we're building this out. And okay. So one thing, we're building this with all of these partners that are here. This is a mix of service providers, solution integrators, and then many of our competitors. So Microsoft just announced broad support for A2A as well in their Azure AI Foundry. Google is supporting this in agent space, and a variety of Google products have it coming as well. So we really do see this becoming a standard for cross-company, cross-service interoperability. It's had a kind of ridiculous community response. We're frankly overwhelmed by the amount of requests and stars and PRs and contributions that we're getting. So we're trying to figure out how to deal with that inside Google while also dealing with all the Google products, trying to integrate it as well. Real quick on roadmap that's coming before I get into some demos of what A2A can do and how it works, though I will say that Ayush's demo was great for teeing that off, so thank you. We're building an official SDK right now, which will have integrated support for authentication, authorization, OTel. We're partnering with companies like Google products, but also Microsoft, Okta and Auth0. 1Password for support for OAuth and SSO. All of that will be there shortly as well, including many examples. Understanding and having more demos that show how to build agents with MCP and then how to connect them to each other with A2A. So again, thanks Ayush. I'm going to ask for you to contribute some of that demo to the A2A repo, because we'd love that to become a pattern. And as I said, we're working on gRPC support, SDKs in many languages, also things like registries and planners and orchestrators. And I'd love to talk to a little bit about the registry and orchestration and planning, similar to the Nanda effort, since you seem to be further ahead, maybe in the Q&A section. So real quick, I'm going to show a basic demo. You can find this and you can install this entirely on your laptop, on your workstation, in a cloud workstation.
All right, so we're just going to
using our repo. So in this one, we have a sample MESOP application that hosts an orchestrator agent, and the orchestrator agent has no remote agents installed at the beginning. So the user says, what agents do you have? And it says none. I don't know how to do anything, but it's still an agent. It uses an LLM. It can talk to things. So now we're going to start up another agent. That agent's running on a different port, and this is the reimbursement agent. And now we can ask the orchestrator agent, what remote agents do you have access to? And it says, I have access to the reimbursement agent. And then we're going to start up another agent. This one is built on LangGraph. This one is running on port 10,000, and this is a currency converter agent. So all of these agents have individual MCP tools that help them do what they're best at. So now the user is asking the orchestrator agent, reimburse my lunch for 20 euros, but convert it to USD first. So the planner agent breaks this into multiple steps, talks to both of the individual agents and says, okay, I need to do two things. I need to convert euros to USDs, and then I need to reimburse this lunch request. And so all of that happened with the user only interacting with the planner interface, or with the planner agent, the orchestrator agent, which then talks to all of these other individual agents. And that's really the basic idea behind A2A, is you have one agent that's delegating to other agents, and every interaction is really a three-way conversation between a client agent, a server agent, and then some sort of user that is acting on behalf of. And again, that user can be a human user with human in the loop, or it can be another agent, or it can be a service account. Here's something that was built by Okta recently. So again, they have, in this example, they have a bank agent, a bank chat agent, and the bank chat agent provides customer service for bank customers. And it says, hi, I'll help you open an account. Give me your full name, your employer, and work email. So the user enters this information. And it turns out that the bank agent can go talk to that company's HR agent and find if there's any current agreements or promotions set up between the bank and that employer. So now one of the agents is now going, asking the HR agent, hey, to authenticate and then authorize that this user is a part of that company. That sends a push notification to the user. The user then goes and gives approval for the bank agent to access the fact that they work at that company, and then the bank agent is able to offer additional services or additional promotions to that. Not sure how well this is coming through on my screen, but this is the general flow, and I believe this deck will be shared out. One of the key parts of A2A is that A2A is modeled as traditional web applications. That was something that was very, very important to the whole team working on A2A, is that we wanted to invent as little as possible. We didn't want to create anything new, especially as it comes to anything related to privacy, security, authentication, authorization. So the best reaction that personally I got on A2A is when we met with Okta and they wanted to do a deep dive on how authentication and authorization would work, and we walked through a scenario with them, and they stepped back and they said, "Oh, so it's just normal. There's nothing new here." We said, exactly. The goal is for there to be absolutely nothing new here for how auth works. And the same thing for telemetry and tracing, et cetera, et cetera. It's really, agents are modeled as individual services, individual web services. And that bodes well for the Internet of Agents, where agents essentially become microservices. So again, open governance at its core. Apache 2.0 license, everyone can make change to it. We are actively working with the partners to figure out what foundation to put this in. Right now, it's in a Google repo. It's going to move out of a Google repo into a community-owned neutral repo. And yeah, please contribute. So real quick, agentic protocols. So I believe this diagram was showed earlier, and Ayush's demo illustrated this really well. We think an individual agent is built on a particular framework, whether it's Google's ADK, semantic kernel from Microsoft, LangChain, Crew AI. You build an individual local mesh of agents that share tools, share memory, and they share sort of a context for an individual user. Those use a specific LLM, a specific model, and then they use a particular MCP server for access to their tools. And it's likely many MCP servers with many tools. When they want to speak to different agents, those other agents may not want to share their memory, may not want to share their context, may want to just behave as arbitrary, opaque black boxes. And that's really what we see cross industry. Users don't want their Microsoft agent and Google agent to have 100% information to what each other has internally. Also, if you go back to the lesson on monoliths versus microservices, microservices is a much more scalable approach. So instead of having this mega agent that shares all of its memory and tools and can do everything, it's much easier to create a domain-specific or purposeful micro agent that then can work with other micro agents that are good at their individual tasks. And that's where we see A2A coming in, for individual agents to work with other agents over a agentic protocol instead of an API/tool-based protocol. And again, MCP and A2A, MCP for tools, A2A for agents. And we're going to have white papers and demos coming out as well. I'm running short on time, so I'm going to skip a little bit ahead. How it works. So the principles we have, I'm going to build all of those out. Enterprise ready, this and simple and consistent really go together, in my opinion. We don't want to invent anything new. We don't want to invent, here's the new way to do auth. And you have to use, this particular flavor of OAuth, and you can't use your legacy Kerberos implementation. You can't use MTLS, or you can use this, but not this. We want to say, hey, just like existing microservices that you'll have within a company or across internet services, auth is described externally to the protocol. So web services, almost all of them are based on HTTP. And then they have standard mechanisms for, here's how you authenticate with me. So that's definitely what we're doing with A2A. We require HTTP. And we want to integrate with all existing forms of auth, security, privacy, tracing, monitoring. Nothing new there. That goes into simple and consistent. Same thing, we don't want to invent new magic words. We don't want anyone to have to learn something new when there's already a solved problem in the industry. Async first, yeah, agentic interactions are interruptible. Their goals can change. Their return types can change. Their input types can change. They can take more than maybe a few seconds to execute. They can take maybe minutes or hours or weeks. Imagine if you had an agent that was helping you apply for a passport, or perhaps plan a trip. I know myself, when I plan trips with hotels and flights and activities and events, there's a lot of moving pieces and it can take me weeks. And all of these things need to be asynchronous, need to be revisited over time. Modality agnostic, so different agents have different experiences. Some of them are voice only, some of them are video only, some present forms, some need to control and render their own experience in a custom iframe. All of that needs to be supported as well. So the agents in A2A need to be able to negotiate their modalities. And then opaque execution. This is an area where we've really gone back and forth many times, both inside Google and with the community. There's no notion of an agent sharing creating a task and then sharing a bunch of subtasks that the other agent has deep visibility into and can interrogate and cancel or maybe change. Instead, there's an overall goal that's encapsulated in a task, and the agents can decide to share as much information as they want. They can ask for status updates, they can ask for structured status updates, but it's really all up to the negotiation between the agents. And it's meant to be opaque so that the agents can share only what they need to share. The four main capabilities that we have in A2A are: one, capability discovery. So agents advertise their capabilities using a thing we call an agent card. Think of it as an agent's resume. And getting into the concept of a registry, it's really difficult in an individual resume to list every single capability that a person or agent has. An agent, since it's autonomous, can often, and has an LLM at the center, it can often do things that you didn't know it was capable of doing ahead of time, right? And so think of writing your own resume as a human. There are things that you can do that aren't listed on there. So the process of agentic discovery, I think, is going to be fundamentally different than maybe tool discovery or data discovery, right? Because there's going to be some sort of concept of queryability, or maybe interrogation of the agents, where I say, I need an agent to perform this task, and then something in some registry or orchestration layer needs to interview a bunch of agents to figure out who the best agent is, and maybe even bring a list back to its user, which could be a human or another agent, to help select that. The next capability is user experience negotiation. So clients and agents need to agree on how are they communicating. Things aren't going to be just chat forever. Sure, there can be embedded images, there can be other type of content, but there could be requirements that, like, hey, right now we have to switch to a video stream, or I have to have the ability to render my own content in your canvas because of my own business reasons or my own branding reasons. Task and state management, this is really the core concept of A2A. Agents collaborate on a task. The goal of the task can change over time. The user input to the task can change over time. The agents can ask each other clarifying questions. And that goes into collaboration. The client and the agent can really communicate back and forth with each other, and then potentially with a human or whoever the client wants to communicate with, to ask each other questions. I want you to do this task, send me more information. The client can send all sorts of contextual information that's unstructured. It can ask the human for more information. It can answer on behalf of the humans. As I mentioned earlier, there's three actors. There's some sort of end user, which can be a human or service. There's a client, which is an agent, and then a remote agent. And the two agents work together, and the client agent really decides when to involve another user. I believe I talked about this one already. So with that, I know that we're really, really short on time. I don't necessarily, we can go through agent card and talk about how in A2A, you create a task has a status and it generates artifacts. Artifacts are the generated results. A task can create many artifacts. Artifacts are named, and they can be versioned, and they have metadata, send messages. and these have parts, but I think the time would be better served by getting into Q&A. And I know I've probably used up my 15 minutes already, but if it's okay, and there's still a little time, how do we feel about Q&A?
Let's do that. Let's do that. Now, Todd, first of all, this is fantastic. If you can go back to the diagram, so if we can leave it on during the Q&A. So you mentioned about the very first tab here, very first column here, the capability discoveries and so on. Tell us a little bit more about that, because on one hand, these capabilities will be self-advertised. On the other hand, they could easily become a false advertisement. And also, the capability discoveries would be kind of hidden in the agent cards. It's not easy for, in the future, when hopefully everything works out, we have millions, maybe billions of these agents. What does it mean to have these capabilities as a field? By the way,
Yeah.
capabilities and skills, kind of both. Yeah.
Yeah. So we call capabilities skills, and skills is some JSON object with all sorts of sub values in it as well. But yeah, you're right. This is an area that there will be a lot more investment in, and there will be a lot more collaboration with planners and registries. So yeah, the concept of a signed card, or a card that has some sort of reputational score on it, or some sort of validation provided by a third-party entity, that absolutely has to come as well. Cards will probably also have payment information in it, like to use this agent, you have to have this subscription, or you have to pay this, or you have to have achieved a certain accreditation or a certain amount of validation to be able to use it. That perhaps could go into the auth area as well. Yeah, sorry, my mind went blank on that last one.
No, it is so much to keep up with. I can imagine
Yeah.
my going blank here. We're just talking about the capabilities, and but the fact that somebody else has to authenticate it, are we thinking kind of a Yelp kind of scenario where others are leaving comments and saying, hey, your capabilities are great?
It could be. So I think this is really where the next step needs to be with registry and planner, and where we really are engaging a lot with the community right now. Also, a lot of these agent cards may not be public, right? So there's definitely some services, like you could imagine Expedia or Google having services with public cards, but within a company, or across paid service boundaries, you may want to have private cards, or cards that only have information for authenticated users, or subscription users, or users who have certain types of capabilities on their side.
Right.
So with that, it gets into registries and planners, where this will probably be a hugely federated system, sort of like DNS, where there's nodes where you can find other nodes. Private DNS, same type of thing. Within individual companies, within individual VPCs, within individual private networks, there will probably be individual registries as well that can then federate to each other, and then have different types of attributes or security capabilities that determine who can use what, or who can discover what. In terms of how do you find the right agent, that's going to be a really, really challenging problem. And that's going to, I think of it sort of like a search problem, where right now, when somebody enters a query into Google, and Google is doing all sorts of comparisons against billions of websites, there's all sorts of algorithms that are useful there. I feel like the search problem for finding the right agent for a particular task is going to approach that scale at some point.
Ayush, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually had a follow-up question to that. Yeah, really great presentation. I had a follow-up question to that in maybe two parts. First part is when you're saying like the search problem is around like finding the agent, but it's like how would you make sure that I can talk to an agent? For example, if there is an agent which is in the Salesforce sort of agent store, and there's one in like the Google agent store, even if I can discover them, like how do you ensure like speaking to them? And do you imagine, like, for example, currently in A2A, are these persistent agents, or are these like more ephemeral, generated on the fly kind of agents? Because that's what like LangChain and Crew AI would conventionally do.
Yeah, I think we're really early in this. And so what we see happening right now, especially in Google, and then with the partners like Microsoft and Salesforce and SAP, is everyone has their own kind of customer managed registry of agents. So Google has a product called AgentSpace, SAP, or Salesforce has one called Agentforce. Microsoft has one called Copilot Studio. And all of these, an organization will purchase one of these, and then their administrator will curate a catalog of agents that their employees are able to use. And so there's a single place to go, and that doesn't really federate anywhere else. So in AgentSpace, for example, your administrator could bring in a connection to the Salesforce Agentforce, or to a set of agents that have been specifically listed or specifically allowed in that organization. So it's definitely not massively open like DNS yet. It's really a lot of walled gardens like app stores are right now, and we do expect that to change over time.
Can you say that more a little bit? Because if there are 20 different app stores, then there would be natural reason to be highly interoperable and highly open, versus maybe there are only one or two.
Yeah, I think, again, I think you can get into more of a consumer enterprise boundary as well, because I think with enterprise today, there's millions of app stores. If you think about it, there's IT departments control what apps are allowed for their employees. Every organization has their own. On consumer, there's a few super large app stores. Those also have gatekeepers as well. So I think that gets into a little bit of who is going to be the gatekeeper and who is going to run it. There's a lot of security and privacy and like new types of vulnerabilities that I think we all don't fully understand, for, fraudulent agents, or agents that do scary things with prompt injection, or agents that shadow other agents and pretend to be other agents. So I think there might be some very fast moving, entirely open registries, but I think bad actors are going to go there as well. So I think there's going to be some gatekeeping and really slow opening access with vetting processes like we saw with app stores as well.
Yeah, that
But I
makes
think
sense.
it's going to evolve.
That kept everybody safe. It might have slowed down the innovation a little bit, but does keep everybody safe. I'm going to allow some of our other panelists to join in and ask questions if Abhishek or Sheng wants to, or Vijay wants to ask a question. In the meantime, Todd, so as you know, today we are releasing a whole architecture for kind of this registry aspect of it. And the short version of that is you start with the A2A agent card, and then you add a few more fields that makes it possible to have a two-level registry. So you have a lean registry that just has the agent ID and a URL for your agent card. And then the agent card itself has the metadata and the endpoints, right? So very similar to how the original agent card is envisioned, and uses the same schema with some additions. Nevertheless, I think it's good to kind of step back and think about what it means to support. There are about 300 million IP addresses / websites today, but there'll be billions of agents, right? So with IPv4, we can only support about 4 billion total IP addresses. So that's clearly not possible. Agents cannot have their own IP addresses. That immediately changes the conversation to, if agents are on an agent card, then, as you said before, how do we deal with the privacy? Some of the agent cards will not be accessible elsewhere. How to do the transition if they want to have backups and so on. So a lot of the architecture that's being put out today as part of the summit addresses those questions with some really smart people from other companies as well. Any thoughts on what are some kind of red flags or absolute necessities as we think about this global registry?
So I think the registry itself needs a protocol or a service interface, a standardized one. It needs to be very dynamic, and it needs to have auth built in from day one. So your comment about the IP addresses, there's obviously going to be things like agent gateways or registries as a service that can say, hey, the way to talk to this agent is on this IP address at this port, and this other agent is on a different port, or they could be on the exact same network address and you have to speak to it slightly differently. So that's great because it will solve a variety of problems in terms of uniqueness of web addresses, but it will also create kind of single point of vulnerability at the gateway level. So things like agent gateways, things like agent planners and orchestrators and registries, those need protocols as well, right? So I think some of the earlier talks were also talking about how A2A is solving a particular communication problem, and that's absolutely correct. There's a lot more needed for a full Internet of Agents.
Let me invite other panelists if they want to chime in, ask questions for Todd.
And 5-minute warning. I have a hard stop.
Yeah, and Vijay has an amazing panel at 10 a.m. So
I was curious about if you guys have talked about, and I know it doesn't fall under specifically in communication aspect, but the notion of composition. So you can have, for example, one debugging agent who needs to talk to another agent who is doing some, let's say, actually running the code and giving real output. And if we are doing some kind of agent search, then we would require existence of both in order to be able to use one. So is there a notion of this finding group of agents or something like that?
Yeah, and this is something that is kind of really popular in some of the IT space as well. So with all of these, like bring your own agent topics, they worry IT departments and CISOs for how you accomplish certain tasks. So they would very much like to say, hey, whenever somebody is using an agent to write code or using an agent to reset their password, they have to follow this recipe. And this recipe is start with the agent that writes the spec and then pass that off to the agent that writes the interface, and then pass that off to an agent that fills in the code, and pass that off to an agent that then writes the test cases, and then run it through some overseer agent to make sure that all the things have happened. So this is where, again, I'll use the word gateway, something like a gateway where you say like, hey, here's the overall task that I want accomplished. And then that gateway have it be configurable enough to say, hey, these types of tasks have to follow this sort of plan. And then that creates some sort of plan that's orchestrated with A2A. But again, that's another layer, another protocol that's needed in Internet of Agents. And yeah, A2A would be the communication part of it.
So if you think about the enterprise DNS, Cloudflare 1111, Google 8888, Cisco has Umbrella, and so on. You see place for them to reinvent themselves to support agents, or you think it will require completely different architecture?
I hope it doesn't require anything new. So again, like if we're inventing new DNS or requiring like IPv7 or like IPv4 or whatever it is, then like it's not going to happen. Like IPv4, I've been working with people trying to move from V4 to V6 for, I don't know, 15 years now. So like fundamentally, everything has to ride on top of existing protocols, and it has to work over DNS, even though DNS is outdated and insecure. It has to, there has to be ties to everything. And so like with A2A, the default discovery mechanism is like use DNS to find the site that you're going to, and then look for a well-known URL to find the agent card. So I think there's going to be more ties like that. But I'm very, I know it's called a protocol, but it's really a service interface. I'm very creating a new layered protocol like DNS or gRPC or something like that is really much too phenomenally big, I think, for Internet of Agents to accomplish in any reasonable time frame.
All right, there you have it, folks. It's better not to reinvent the wheel and use the current rails of the internet. Thank you, Todd, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So those of you who are joining us now, we're having some fascinating conversations this morning. It started with the CTO of Dell, with some conversations, with a live demo, maybe the world's first live demo of a human-to-human conversation that's intermediated with agents. Thank you, Ayush, for doing that.